Alright, today we are going to learn something very powerful in Python. Earlier you learned loops like for and while. Those loops repeat code, but sometimes one loop is not enough. Sometimes we need a loop inside another loop. So this idea is called nested loops. A nested loop is simply a loop inside another loop. The outer loop runs first, and every time it runs once, the inner loop runs fully. So think about it like this. Imagine you have several boxes. Inside each box there are several items. First you open one box, and then you look at every item inside that box. Then you go to the next box, and then look at every item again. So the box loop is the outer loop, and the item loop is the inner loop. So it looks something like this. This is the basic structure. So you have this for outer loop that loops into something, and then for every outer loop we are going to have an inner for loop that is going to iterate on this something else list. So it's going to pick each item in the inner item in the box that is inside this outer box. So you can see that every time the outer loop runs, the inner loop runs fully. So this is the basic template, but let's take a look at a real example, the real program. So here you can see if we run this program, we will get the output. It will look like this. So you can see that for every value in the range 3, which is the outer loop here, so I iterates from 0, and then for every 0 this loop is going to run twice, because the j is going to pick two values, the 0 and 1. So for every 0 you have 0 0 0 1, and for every 1 for the next iteration is going to be 1 0 1 1, and similarly 2 0 and 2 1. So the inner loop repeats every time the outer loop runs. So this is what happening. So you can notice, just like I said, the inner loop runs completely. So when I equal to 0, the inner loop runs 2 times for j equal to 0 and j equal to 1. And for the next iteration, when I is 1, you can see the j is 0 and j is 1. So the inner loop runs 2 times for every value of I. So I repeat, so the inner loop repeats every time the outer loop runs. So this is the basic idea of nested loops. Now let's see a more practical example, which I will post it here. And this is another Python script where, let's say we have 2 lists, a colors list that has red, blue, green, and items list that has car, shirt, and house. Now we want to combine every color with every other item. So here is my program, and you can see the output here. So you can see for every color, first it's going to pick the red color. So you can see the red here, and for every red color it's going to pick the item. So it's car, shirt, and house. So you can easily understand that for each color here, the program is going through every item. So it's going to pick red, going through each item 3 times, because we have 3 items in the inner loop, and similarly for blue and for green. So this is a very good example. And so the nested loops are very useful when we want to combine things like this. So now let's take a look at another common example, which is the multiplication table. So you might be very familiar with this program in other languages, but yeah, in Python also it's the same thing. So you can see the output here when I run it. You can see here the outer loop controls the rows. So you can see it has 1 to 6, so, and otherwise 1 to 6 minus 1, the upper end is 5. So you can see 5 times it's going to run, and the inner loop controls the number inside each row. So you can see it's going to print the I star j, the multiplication, and that's how the inner loop is controlling the numbers inside each row. So if the outer loop runs 5 times, the inner loop also runs 5 times here. So the program performs 25 operations. So you can see here 5 for each row, and you can see 5 values in each row, and we have 5 rows. So 25 operations. So now let's try something really fun. This is another sample script, and you can see it's going to output the asterisk in this way. So you can see here the inner loop actually depends on the outer loop. So let's say the I begins with 1 here, let's say. Actually it begins with 0. So you're going to say 0 plus 1, which is 0, so range of 0. So for every 0 iteration, or here it's 1, 0 plus 1. So it's going to run once and print star, asterisk, and then leave a space, because we want a space between each asterisk. So you can see for every loop the I is going to be incremented, and hence the asterisk printed is also incremented. So it's going to print 1, twice, thrice, 4 times, 5 times. So you can clearly see the inner loop has the value I, which is controlled by the outer loop. So when I becomes bigger, the inner loop runs more times. So this is a very common technique when printing patterns. Now let's talk about nested loops with lists inside list within list. So this is pretty different logic here. So let's take an example of a matrix here. So this is a 2-dimensional list, and to read every value, when we use this matrix, when you use we can use the nested loops to read every value inside this matrix. So let's try this script. So this is a working example, and if I run this script, you can see here it printed all the values inside the matrix from 1 to 9. So how does it do? So it's going to get the matrix row, and then for every row it's going to print each value in the row. So it takes the first row and prints 1, 2, 3, which is a value in that row, and 4, 5, 6 from the second row, and 7, 8, 9 from the third row. So it goes through each row, and inside each row it goes through every value in that row. So this is another common use of nested loops. Now many beginners ask an important question: can we mix different types of loops? Yes, we can mix it. So here is another example that I have. We can actually put the for loop inside a while loop. This is not common, but it's possible, and Python allows this. So this logic is the same. So one loop runs inside the other loop. So if I run this program, it's still going to work fine. So you can mix for and while, or while and for. It's still going to work. So now let's talk about break inside nested loop. So break, as you know, stops the loop early. So here I have a sample script here, and you can see here there is a break in the inner loop, and when I run this program, we can see that the output, when the j is equal to 3, you can see the inner loop stops. So it's not printing the 3 in the output. So break only stops the loop where it appears. So this break appears in the inner loop. So it's going to stop only the inner loop, and it's not going to affect the outer loop at all, because you can see in the output the outer loop continues running. So that's how we know here that the break here affects only the inner loop, the loop where it is appearing. And let's take a look at the continue inside nested loops. We saw the break inside the nested loop, and let's move on to the next interesting example. And here you can see it's the same example, but we have the continue here, and when I run this script, you can see the output as here. So when j is equal to 2, the step is skipped. So the loop simply moves to the next number. So you can see when the j is equal to 2, it starts with 0, 0, 0, and you can see it prints 0, 0, 0, 1, but it didn't print 0, 2. And this 2 is where the J comes into play. So when the J is 2, it's skipping the loop and it's not going to print this output. And the same thing here, 1, 0, 1, 1, it did not print 1, 2 because the 1, 2 is satisfying the 2, which is the value of J, and the same goes for 2, 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2. The 2, 2 is missing, 1, 2 is missing, and 0, 2 is missing because it was skipped because of this continue statement. Now let's talk about pass inside nested loops. So this is a very good example and it's a valid one. So instead of continue or break, we have pass. So it prints nothing because it's just a placeholder pass. So if you are going to implement the code inside this for loop later in the future, you can simply put this pass and Python will not complain anything. So it's going to, but if you don't have anything, it's going to complain. And it says expected intended block after the for statement. So you can put a dummy. So that's why we have the pause here. So it prints nothing basically. So that's why programmers use this. Sometimes we want to create a loop structure first, right? And then we can add the real code later. So that's how it is. So this can be applied to any example. So even if you have another example, let's say here we have the similar things. We can just put pass here and then we can add the logic later. Now let's look at another practical example. Suppose we have students and subjects that we have in the list. So for example, a list of students and list of subjects. Now we want to show which student studies which subject. So we can iterate them using this loop, the outer loop and the inner loop here. And when I run this program, we can see the output iterates. So it picks the first element, first student name Alice, and it loops Alice for all the studies subject. So you can see that Alice studies math, science, history, and then it goes to the next student name and finally Charlie. And that's how the outer loop controls the students and the inner loop goes through all subjects. This is exactly how nested loops work in many real programs. So before we finish, here are a few helpful tips. The first tip is do not add too many nested loops if possible. 2 levels are common as shown in these examples in this video. These 2 levels are common and they are very easy to understand. The second tip is use clear variable names like row, value, or students, subjects here for example. So this makes the code easier to read. And the third tip is remember that nested loops run many times. So very large loops may slow down a program. But for learning Python and writing normal programs, nested loops are completely normal. So alright, let's quickly review what we learned today. A nested loop is a loop inside another loop. So this is a loop that is inside another loop, and the outer loop runs first always, and each time the outer loop runs, the inner loop runs completely. It finishes all the iteration, and then the outer loop picks the next student, and then it finishes all the iteration. It runs fully. So that's the third tip. So we learned so far about these tips and the inner loops and the nested loops. So you can try it on your own. And we used nested loops in this example, in this video, for combining data, and you can use it for multiplication. And we saw it was used for processing list inside the list, as in this example. And we also saw how break, continue, and pass behave inside nested loops. If you understand nested loops, you are now learning and real programming techniques. In the next lesson, we will learn more about the interesting concepts in Python as we cover in this video series, and we are going to deep dive into the lists, which are the append, remove, and slice, and see how these things work in Python. So if you like this video, give a thumbs up, subscribe, and share with your friends and anyone else so they can also understand these concepts. And happy coding, and I will see you in the next video.